Here at the Harriet Tubman Institute and at the Tubman Top Sessions, we offer an intellectual space that fosters debate among scholars whose research interest focuses on the history and contemporary experiences of Africans and people of the African diaspora in Canada and globally. It gives individual researchers as well as research teams a platform to exchange different ideas and theoretical frameworks, etc. The Institute is thus an intellectual space that offers an opportunity for individual scholars to critically share their research in the spirit of engaging in intellectual debate and sharing. Before we begin today, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I wanted to acknowledge our presence on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. In making this land acknowledgement, I honor and acknowledge the land and its people who have been here for thousands of years. In relation, I would be remiss not to mention the current genocide still happening in Gaza and a catastrophic situation in Sudan, Congo, and Haiti. I think it's important to contextualize the repressive colonial and imperial oppression that undergirds these current situations. Influenced by my personal own Black feminist politics and scholarship practice and movement, I recognize that my political commitment mandates and solidarity and bound up and intertwined with the liberation and self-determination of Indigenous people, as well as Palestinian, Sudanese, Congolese, and Haitian people as well. Now, today, I'm incredibly excited to introduce our speaker, Kelston Cort. Kelston is a doctoral candidate in the Social and Political Thought program at York University, a fantastic program. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Sociology with honors from the University of Guyana and a Master of Science in Sociology, specializing in development studies from the universities of the West Indies. Broadly speaking, his research interests are situated along the academic terrain of critical spirituality, higher education, labor studies, and family studies. More specifically, Cort's current research focus, presents an intersectional understanding of the ways in which the social class location and the racial ascription of Black families of Caribbean heritage inaugurate and animate the experiences and educational outcome of their children who are currently pursuing undergraduate studies at post-secondary institutions in Toronto. Throughout his professional life across the Americas, Kelston has been a vocal advocate and a fierce social activist for positive youth and community development, and Cort is also the recipient of the Ontario Graduate Scholarship, the OGS. So to explain a little bit more about his talk, Black Middle-Class Families and Family Life, examining the ways in which the currencies of the community's cultural wealth framework function in retaining and protecting the sociocultural and economic capitals of Black middle-class family. He is reviewing critically the studies of Kosei, Figging, and Sykes, Lacey, Patillo, and Rolock, and others, and Wright and others, and James, and it evidently reminds us of the innumerable ways in which racism is reducing and removing the high sociocultural and economic currency of Black middle-class families. But Black middle-class families readily adopt various quote-unquote practices of living to contain the impact of racism from completely eroding the sociocultural and economic currencies by deploying the collective force of their community's cultural wealth. The use of the community's cultural currencies upholds the class-based structures of Black middle-class families, cementing the racial identity formation of Black children, removing the social isolation they face primarily in predominantly white communities, and serves to reposition Black youth on a successful academic path. This invaluable contribution of the larger Black community deserves greater theoretical attention. Therefore, by utilizing the tenets of the community cultural wealth framework, we underscored and illuminate the collective utility of the Black community, showing a constellation of parallel sociocultural and geographic relationship that continuously sustain the middle class structure. Even though class remains connected to the ways inequality of outcomes are experienced, the social cultural security of Black middle class families remains at the generosity of wider Black communities. In this way, scholars of social class should take the community's currency of the wider Black community into consideration, and this especially when trying to understand the complex structural nature and Shariah practices of Black middle class families in Western class-based societies. So please, everybody, help me in giving a big round of applause to our speakers.
All right, let me first, when you can hear an introduction of such nature with such eloquence and grandiloquence of proud Negro like me, you can imagine how inflated my ego is. Only the resurrected Freud can contain me at this moment. So let me just say thanks to Dr. Bianca for her kind words of introduction. And let me join in welcoming those persons online who are joining us. I know I have people from around the globe, maybe from Africa, the Caribbean, South America, North America, and also from the Latin region. So, and those in person also, I'm very happy to have you here, have my soldiers, and have also my students here with me here. So I'm very happy to see you all. And it will be remiss of me not to recognize our distinguished guest, midst here this afternoon. We do have the Consulate General of the Corporate Republic of Guyana, Grace Joseph, here. Can you kindly wave to be recognized, please? Grace and I shared a history and a geography together once, and so I'm a little bit nervous. I have to be so dignified and so proper because she's coming from the diplomatic world, and I'm very proud of you, Grace, to be actually giving your service to the government of Guyana in this actually in that critical capacity with your acumen in the international relations field. So welcome and thanks for coming. Yeah. Now, I think many times people want to know how you come to get to this field, how you come to be thinking through the way you're thinking about a particular concept, or why you're using such a theory or theoretical frame to make a case. And so because I'm someone who loves to mind people's business, especially Black people, I recall vividly a few years ago, it was 11 o'clock, and I was talking to the learned professor in my on my committee, the great Ann Kim, and she asked the question, why should we care about the Black working class? And when that question was posed to me, I had no answer because I was not even thinking as how a scholar should think, yeah? And so I recall I got my hand on this book, and it actually said, why are middle-class Blacks angry, and why should America care? So I said to myself, listen, I'm going to read this book, extract the beautiful part that speaks of why Americans should care. I'm going to re-engineer it. And when I meet the learned professor, I will sound intelligent. So, you do these things as grad student, So I read the book, but in reading the book, it got my attention to a point where I realized the middle class here, this is the Black faces in high places, and they're angry, and they're going through a lot of difficulties too. So I said, you know what, I'm going to be minding their business later after comprehensive exam. And so I literally got some other books, and I got to a point where I started to read a little on the Black middle class family. Remember, I have no interest in the Black faces in high places. My focus on working class families. But then when I realized, I turned to literature in the States. I was looking at Patio 2013's work. I looked at Lacey 207, Burke et al. 2019, and I realized they all are saying the same story. Black middle class families are under pressure. They're not fully enjoying their socioeconomic resources. So I was like, okay, let me go to London and see what's happening there. So I turned to Rollock et al. 2015. I look at Wright 2000 et al. 2021. And then I was like, this is a similar pattern. So I said, what's happening in Canada? So I came to Carl's work, and I looked at that a chapter he wrote in his recent work, not recent, 2021, and I said, wow, I could finally get to mind Black people's business. I'll be doing a paper soon. So that's how it came into being. And then I actually I passed through a corner speaking with Prilly, and she was like, this is good work. Use the cultural capital framework. And so when she gave me that theoretical frame, that's how everything came into being. So I'm standing here on the shores of great thinkers and with humility. May I begin? So we are talking about, oh, I need to, I have not been doing this for years, yo. I know, touching remotes. So we are talking about, okay, is it working? Yeah. So we have actually a very few distinctive objectives to cover this afternoon. I'll present to you, I'll draw a conceptual framework of the Black middle class from familial formation in Western democracies. Particularly, I'll be talking about it in the Canadian context, United Kingdom, and United States of America. Then we'll be demystifying the tenets of the community cultural wealth framework and how that framework literally sustains the socioeconomic resources of the Black middle class family. I'll be applying and evaluating the usefulness or the utility of the community cultural wealth framework. And there are four broad themes. I will actually be doing that under. The first will be racial identity formation of Black children of middle class families, the educational attainment of Black middle class children, the social relational connection of Black middle class families, and also I look at the navigation currencies that they use to get through the university in terms of applying their spiritual capital. Am I dropping anybody? No. All right. Just as the presence of cumulus nimbus clouds presents a weather pattern causing heavy rain, flash floods, and strong winds, social class, according to Sage 2015, brings into focus the stored historical baggage and accumulated socioeconomic advantages families have over time, just as how the well-developed cumulus-nimbus cloud bear out a flat top called an Avil dome created by wind shear or temperature changing at high altitude. One's social class reveals in Wist and Dowsley view the practices of living, enveloping the day-to-day encounters such as the food we eat, the clothing we wear, where we live, and the condition under which we die. Why then should we not talk about class through the prism of the family, since the family as an institutional unit mediates the practices of living of one social class? As an unrepentant thinker of class, please may I invite you to join with me to think through how social class inaugurates and animates the practices of living for Black middle class families in light of the institutional and personal racist risks that are embedded in Western democracies. The acquisition of a middle class status remains an aspirational mission for the underclass as the status comes to form a more concrete socioeconomic standard from which the measures of societal success are evaluated against for families and communities. The middle class social location of Black families share a geographic separation from the low-income household. Broadly encompasses the professional and technical managerial class who possesses a relatively high level of income as well as post-secondary certification. The occupational prestige, relatively high income, and education form the collective foundation of the family's capital, which provides some Black families with the advantage to live in more predominantly affluent white communities, while others reside in close proximity to poor urban Black communities. Black middle class social standing is recognized as the hallmark of achievement, since the colonized origin of Black communities has had their roots deeply embedded in the working class tradition. From the low working class location, Black family had to negotiate the racist ideological force which perpetuated, regulated, and reinforced inequalities of outcomes in the areas of education, health, housing, policing, as well as the economy. These poor racialized socioeconomic outcomes, which relegated Black families to the margin of the society, were maintained with the supportive powers of institutional racism as well as everyday racism. The practice of institutional racism disproportionately removes and reduces the socioeconomic protections for racialized groups with the use of unquestionable bureaucratic practices, policies, and procedures. Everyday racism, on the other hand, even though it can be seen as a feature operating outside the domain of the institutions, it is knitted together nonetheless by three mutually interlocking strands of dependent processes: the marginalization of those, and I quote, the marginalization of those identified as racially or ethnically different, the problematization of other cultures and identities, and symbolic or physical repression, resistance through humiliation or violence, unquote. Collectively, institutional racism and everyday racism or racist practices, collectively, institutional racism and everyday racism commingle together not only to structure and allocate resources unequally according to ethno-racial markers, but they deny racialized families of their basic dignity and humanity. But with the elimination of slavery and indentureship, racist segregation laws, and overt racist practices, the removal of the colonial masters from the so-called New World, and the growth in the industrialized economy gave rise to newly developed Black bourgeoisie class formation. Today, Black families have achieved greater occupational access, are better positioned to accomplish upward social mobility, are in a better financial position to transition from urban locality to secure upward social mobility, and are in upward social mobility and opportunities in suburban communities. In fact, a large number of Blacks are attending higher institutions of learning, are occupying positions of power in corporations, are accumulating wealth and maintaining middle-class social standing over numerous generations. More specifically, the Pew report shows Black adults experienced the largest income increase from 1971 to 2015 and were the only racial group to see a decrease in the percentage of the low-income earners. Moreover, from 2020 to 2021, 12% of Black adults moved up from the middle to the upper income tier, compared with 25% of Asian adults. Yet, with these material gains, Black middle-class families remain susceptible to the changing macroeconomic conditions of the economy and the force of institutional racism. The ever-growing presence of racism having a permanent hold in Western institutions or Western democracies, operating both at the structural and the personal level, has caused Black middle-class families in America to be deprived of more lucrative income earning opportunities, promotional possibilities, and accumulation of wealth, and having a healthy psychological profile. In Canada, like the United Kingdom, while Black middle-class families have secured greater forms of capital to cultivate a conducive habitus to shape their life chances, their children continue nonetheless to experience racial discrimination in the system of education and encounters of social isolation in their suburban communities. Simply put, despite their accomplishments, Black middle-class families are enjoying their socio-economic resources much less, because the racialized risk of the society continue to reduce and remove layers of protections that are associated with the possession of a traditional middle-class location. Since middle-class standing does not insulate Black families from experiencing various forms of racial discrimination, the overarching question is, and it's in green there for those who are paying attention, The overarching question is, how do Black middle-class families prevent the institutional and everyday effects of racism from completely casting a debilitating or paralyzing cumulative net on their life chances? To answer this question, we evoke the community culture wealth framework to illuminate its usefulness, to demonstrate the various ways it sustains and protects the structure of Black middle-class families. Oh, sorry, let me go back. Okay, that's it. USO's 2012 articulation of the framework underscores the forms of assets and resources that are embedded in racialized communities, which are mainly applied to understand the experiences of minoritized and first-generation students in the system of education. Nonetheless, we aim to shift the application of the framework away from its familiar domain, that is, the education system, and foreground its utility in supporting not only working-class communities, but the social structure of Black middle-class families. And this brings me to talk about the theoretical framework, community cultural wealth, CCW. The primary aim of the study was influenced by the community cultural wealth framework, theoretical framework. This framework projects a contrasting viewpoint to that of Bordeaux's conception on the location and possession of forms of capital that lie in the familial unit. Yusso and Sullivan have defined community cultural wealth as an asset-based framework which encapsulates a wealth of knowledges, abilities, opportunities, and relational networks of connections possessed and employed strategically by members of the minoritized community to understand, to withstand and survive, the personal and institutional forms of racism. In offering an expansive and culturally responsive framework to account for the forms of wealth that minoritized communities employ to negotiate the racist terrains of society, Yusso underscores the presence of aspirational capital, familial capital, navigational capital, social capital, linguistic capital, and resistant capital as an interconnected network of capitals available to the minoritized society. And there we can see the list of the capitals. For Yusso, why these forms of capital emerged as a result of the, and I quote, as a result of the accumulated assets of resources in the histories and lives of communities of color, unquote, Bordeaux, on the other hand, draws a contrasting position, accounting for the possession of various forms of capital found in middle-class families through the attainment of formal schooling or from one's family. Black middle-class families possessing the cultural, economic, and social wealth are broadly recognized and institutionally rewarded in class-based societies. In doing so, against the ongoing onslaught of racial discrimination. Therefore, to show how the resources and assets in the wider Black community sustain the class-based structure of Black middle-class families, we define and situate selected forms of capital, of cultural capital framework that are often used by Black middle-class family. And the first one we look at here is the aspirational capital. The deployment of the aspirational capital of Black families encompasses the use of inspiring stories to persuade their children to create and maintain ambitious goals, even in the face of structural challenges or personal crucibles, real or perceived. Black middle-class families utilize aspirational capital to ensure their children can maintain a similar class standing as them, because children of Black middle-class families are highly likely to experience downward mobility. And I will explain that further later in our discourse. Secondly, there is the available pool of familiar capital that Black middle-class families have also at their disposal. The use of familiar capital extends beyond the nuclear family and therefore incorporates the bonds of interpersonal connections with members of the extended family. This shared sense of community is what the Black middle class families utilize to deal with the emotional cost that is derived from racial discrimination, economic uncertainty, and professional fatigue. Thirdly, similar to the familial capital is available pool of societal capital, social capital, sorry, on which Black middle class families depend on the network of interpersonal connection for the instrumental and emotional needs. With the use of the networks of relational connection, Black families are able to secure financial support, obtain information to secure racially friendly school environment for their children, are given strategies how to detect racial biases in the lives of their children, as well as information to locate racially safe communities to raise their families. Fourthly, Black middle class families have a pool of navigational currencies, including the strategic use of ignorance, silence, and censorship to maneuver and negotiate hostile working environments that seem to question their productive capabilities and limit their promotional possibilities. The dependency on the resistance capital informs the oppositional actions of Blacks, which are grounded in the historical struggle for liberation as they confront hierarchies of domination and systems of oppression. Finally, what I had to do, I had to make a slight adjustment here to actually incorporate the spiritual capital, which is not talked about by Yusso. And actually, I actually brought this in from the work of Hubbard, 2009. And what I had to do, so we expanded this framework using the work of Hubbard to accentuate the ways in which Black middle class students deploy their spiritual currency to negotiate the isolated terrains of the academy. To Hubbard, spiritual capital is defined, and I quote, as a set of resources and skills rooted in a spiritual connection to a reality greater than oneself, unquote. Just as how undocumented students employ their spiritual practices to attenuate the negative impact of institutional racism from derailing their success in higher education, Black middle class families navigate the contours of the racist economy, drawing on their spiritual practices to cope with the burden of racism. In what follows, we establish a symbiotic relationship between the community cultural wealth and the affluent socioeconomic capital of Black middle class families, thereby paving the way for us to clearly understand how the currencies of the wider Black community uphold the Black middle class family structure. And the first one I will look at is called racial socialization, racial identity formation. The development of racial identity among Black youth through the process of racial socialization, that is, acquiring the values, attitude, and understanding of the realities to live in a racist society, is of primary importance to the child rearing practices among Black middle class families. Black middle class families perceive a high degree of prejudices and racial discrimination than socioeconomically disadvantaged families in the society. According to Peters, Black families do recognize that, and I quote, their children must be accepted in the Black community in order to have friends, and they must be accepted in the white community in order to survive, unquote. Racial socialization, therefore, allows for families to influence the ways in which their children come to understand their own racial identity, as well as having the social currency to navigate the intergroup dynamics that exist among other racial groups in the society. Instructively, with the use of race-related conversations, Black families transmit to their children the coping techniques to mitigate the forces of racism and equally socialize their children using Black historical figures to develop a sense of racial pride in their Black identity. This racial pride that is integrated in the self-concept of Black youth is associated also with self-confidence, self-discipline, and determination, all of which become attributes that Black families ensure their children acquire to successfully thrive academically economically, and psychosocially. Recognizing the need to maintain their wholesome racial identity, Black families whose socioeconomic resources give them greater access to white workplaces, institutions of learning, and suburban neighborhoods, frequently and deliberately engage with the socio-cultural currencies of the larger Black community. In this way, they're able to locate a psychological safety net or emotional zone of comfort to nourish and reaffirm their Black racial identity that is being diminished at the hands of discrimination and alienation. In fact, while some Black families who occupy predominantly white spaces take temporary refuge using norms, values, and relational networks in the Black community to deal with the effects of racism, other families intentionally seek out learning institutions as well as community that reflect a plurality of racial identities to nurture a healthy Black self-identity in their children. As Black middle-class families intentionally situate their children within the confines of the racial schooling environment, in order to prevent them from the ravages of racism and a deficit-based racial identity, they do so at the expense of forfeiting a premium education that is often located in predominantly white suburban communities. Nonetheless, they take comfort knowing that their children will be more protected and racially supported within the contours of the larger black minoritized community. I thought I jumped to education there, but I mentioned education. Now, secondly, we move to the educational attainment. Black middle-class families, respective of the intergroup socio-economic location, ascribe a premium value to the educational success of their children. And as such, they become overtly involved on a protracted basis in the academic life of their children to give them qualitative advantages to reproduce a similar social class position to theirs. In doing so, Black middle class youth are exposed to structured leisure activities, including but not limited to music, gymnastics, dancing, swimming, and various forms of sports. This style of familiar engagement, bearing the inscription of concerted cultivation, inspires Black youth to pursue their studies, embracing the narrative of their families that they must work twice as hard than white students in order to be successful in their educational pursuit. However, the educational journey of Black youth is constantly being plagued with different forms of structural racism, including low teachers' expectations, streaming of Black youth into non-academic pathways, and allotting disproportionately harsher punishments, office referrals, suspension, expulsion to Black youth for transgressing the rules of the school. Collectively, these systemic barriers do not only limit, the post-secondary school prospects of Black youth, but these youths who are disproportionately punished are highly likely to have a compromised psychological profile with more depressive symptoms. Recognizing the structural barriers that confront their children's educational journey, Black middle-class families tactically employ various strategies, choosing schools with diverse racial population, advocating for the children to access selective streams, adopting a confrontational style of engagement when reason fails to advance their children's interests, and financing private tutoring and homeschooling for their children to remove and reduce the devastating effects of racism from derailing the educational success of their children. To make sure the cumulative effect of racism does not cast a devastating impact on the children's future, Black middle-class families monitor their children's academic journey in order to respond in a timely manner to racist and other impediments that seem to pose a threat to their children's educational success. But even with the adoption of these strategies, Black youth at times fall victim to the hand of racism, forcing their families to unleash their socioeconomic resources as well as a community cultural currencies to better reposition them on a successful academic path. In fact, the intergenerational cultural currency and transnational familial connectivity that encircle Black families serve as a means through which youth are given the opportunity to escape from the academic injuries, including low teachers' expectation in Western educational system, to their diasporic families in order to continue their studies. To this end, Black families with a pool of socioeconomic resources and diasporic familial connection at their disposal send their children to their country of origin when they are displaying unhealthy social behaviors or have poor academic profile in the Western education systems. This intervention is inaugurated to reposition them on a successful academic path. As such, these concerted intervention strategies, which are located within the familiar capital of Black middle class transnational families, are unleashed to develop Black youth a greater degree of self-discipline, aspiration, and concentration to thrive academically in Western institutions. Because of the resocialization strategies, the newly developed attributes help to improve the academic outcomes of youth upon their return to Western educational systems. Another community-based currency that functions to reposition, protect, and augment the academic success of Black youth is the use of supplementary school, which are community-based organizations dedicated not only to eclipse the deficit-based teaching praxis that Black youth are conditioned with in the classroom, but they are designed to nurture positive growth of academic excellence in the lives of youth from a position of cultural strength. As such, Moscow contends that supplementary schools are viewed by Black parents as a corrective remedy to the deficit-based posture adopted toward the teaching of Black youth, as these schools focus on building the academic capabilities, a culture of self-discipline, and establishing a positive sense of racial identity in the consciousness of Black youth. Black middle class youth and working class together are better able to resolve the educational challenges that are produced from the weight of the white gaze. And this brings me now to talk about the third, the social relational connection. The possession of an available pool of social capital by middle class families bears out the instrumental nature and interpersonal networks of connection which contain potential resources and assets that can be extracted, mobilized, and utilized to procure and secure advantages for the family. In this way, the use of the familiar social capital greatly impacts the aspirational level of their children, and the strong relational ties allowed for the transmission of information surrounding the opportunities to access higher education. Additionally, the use of social capital helps individuals to obtain an education, secures employment opportunities, and procures promotional possibilities. More specifically, Prenda's study locates the sources of social capital in Black middle class families, and she reaffirms the view that they utilize resources from their friendship network, familial ties, employment connection, and educational institutions to secure lucrative geographies that offer better job opportunities. However, the study of Park Janssen et al. Accentuates a mixture of both weak and strong relational tie in Black middle class families from which they can extract social resources. To Parks, Yancey et al., Black middle class families could not always count on their relational ties to definitively secure employment opportunities, nor could they depend on their connections to augment their career possibilities. But to understand why this situation exists, fewer Blacks occupy prestigious positions in corporate workspaces, facilitating the condition for them to depend heavily on a smaller relational network to locate socioeconomic opportunities. Furthermore, Black middle class families who occupy predominantly white workspaces tend to experience racial hostility and discrimination. Likewise, those who reside in predominantly white suburban communities do experience a diminished relational connection, including social isolation, racial hostility, and discrimination, and limited possibilities to develop romantic partnerships as well. While Black middle class families may not be able to utilize the social networks of the larger Black community to secure employment opportunities and possibilities, but they employ the resources of the wider Black community to remove the isolation and effects of racial discrimination they often experience in predominantly white work and living spaces. Recognizing the negative impacts of racism, Black middle class families, Black middle class, I need to go back. Yes. Black middle class families vigilantly monitor the education and social experience of the children in predominantly white spaces and strategically employ the socio-cultural currencies of the wider Black community to help their children navigate the racist terrains of those spaces by building meaningful friendship with other Black children. Specifically, these families expose their children to social settings with other Blacks, some of whom they share a similar socioeconomic status with, while others are mostly drawn from the church and social organization designated to support the social and academic development of Black youth. And lastly, we'll talk about the spiritual currency under navigational and spiritual currency. Capital, sorry. Religiosity and spirituality are deeply integrated into African American and Black British way of life, playing an important role in influencing the child-rearing practices of Black families. While religiosity is concerned with and I quote, the degree to which individuals adhere to the prescribed beliefs and practices of an organized religion, unquote, spirituality for Wayne encompasses a sense of wholeness, healing, and interconnectedness, all of things to the higher self purpose or the creator. Black families employ the teachings and practices of religiosity and spirituality as a source of resistance and determination to navigate systems of oppression, while using the same teaching at the same time to inspire Black youth to have high levels of educational aspiration. Although, and through prayers, youth are encouraged to seek God's guidance to fulfill their ambitions. Burt et al.'s study accentuates the importance of spirituality and the value of a faith-based community in supporting the degree of persistence and successful completion of Black graduate students in higher education. Black graduate students activated their spiritual upbringing, deploying religious messages from their families as a source of inspiration and determination to persevere through the academic challenges at graduate school. Furthermore, Black youth reliance on religious beliefs and acts of spirituality to help them to successfully negotiate the harsh academic contours creates a condition for them to maintain intimate bonds of connectivity with the faith-based community. As such, the church community remains a supportive haven for Black youth during the academic journey, providing them with meaningful interpersonal connection that serve to remove feelings of isolation from graduate students, especially in historically white institutions. And this brings me to the discussion, which I never liked, this really tests my intelligence. Yes, it does. The purpose of this article has been to locate and demonstrate with the use of situational experiences the immeasurable ways in which the currencies and assets of community cultural wealth framework function to uphold the social class formation of Black middle class families. The findings suggest that for too long we are disregarding, obscuring the symbiotic relationship that exists between Black middle class families and the wider Black community. Erroneously, we have come to accept the position that minoritized families of socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds are the ones who largely depend on the affluent currencies of the community cultural wealth, more so to negotiate and navigate the interlocking networks of institutional and everyday racism of the society. However, we have clearly demonstrated, drawing on scholarships from Canada, United Kingdom, and United States of America, how the societal advantages that Black middle class families procure through their through their relatively high income, education, and occupation can be diminished with the forces of racism. But with the use of the community currencies of the wider Black community, they're able to enjoy the benefits that are associated with the class location with some degree of comfort and certainty. Considerably, the perpetual and insidious harm of racism in Western democracies forced Black middle class families to unleash their socioeconomic resources to protect their chances to reproduce their class-based advantages. But these socioeconomic resources are not sufficiently durable to adequately secure their class-based advantages, thereby calling into question Bordeaux's claim on the preemptive authority these socioeconomic resources are afforded in protecting the future life chances of families. Hence, Black middle-class families periodically and strategically extract numerous sociocultural resources from the wider Black community to better accomplish their class-based objectives. These periodic and strategic interactional connections with the wider Black community underline the ongoing struggle, tension, and contradictions of the Black middle-class families to maintain their class-based identity, considering their geographic and social distinctions that stand in contrast with the wider Black community. For example, while Black middle class families find comfort and protection within the wider Black community, nonetheless, they remain vigilant to protect the cultivated middle class habitus from the dispossession of the working class families. However, the movement of the Black middle class families across different class boundaries to tap into the collective pool of resources from the wider Black community to maintain their class interests sums up Ardent's argument that is, power is never the property of an individual, but it belongs entirely to the group if they remain together. The powerful sociocultural currencies of the wider Black community force Black middle class families to function not as a unit, as an individual unit, separate and apart from each other, but rather as a collective group, which Teresa is best described as a group possessing, and I quote, the vectors of oppression and privilege, unquote. In other words, since Blackness is never viewed through the individualistic prism and one person is often assigned a collective responsibility for the entire race, Black middle class families at time may have to temporarily suspend their own class ambitions and adopt a collective posture of the larger Black community for the sake of their socio-economic survival. As Thomas calls for the new theoretical approach to account for the multiplicities of differences, definitional, methodological, and the heterogeneous iterations that lie within the group, it is my submission that we should first demarcate what types of formation Black middle class families possess. This demarcation is necessary because its boundaries are tenuous or weak and its processes and relationships are interdependent on the currencies of the wider Black community. While it is recognized that the community cultural wealth framework serves as a protective haven, thereby insulating students from racial microaggression. Likewise, the currencies that are located in the community cultural wealth framework stand as a determinative cushion to uphold and support the class-based interests of Black middle-class families. In bringing this talk to a close, please allow me to invite you to re-enter into the realm of the lower troposphere, where cumulus nimbus clouds are located. Just as how these cloud formation convey to us that danger is imminent. That is, torrential rainfall, lightning, and thunderstorm are in sight. Black middle class families or Black middle class familiar experiences communicate a similar narrative, a narrative that suggests that its socioeconomic resources are soaked with the heavy weight of oppression, of racism, hence the need for the currencies of the community cultural wealth framework to resist and mitigate the forces of institutional and everyday racism. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I guess for the Q&A you can sit. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kelston. That was a very informative talk. Um we'll open the Q&A one and since I have the microphone, I get to start. So yeah, so I see that your research does a lot of discourse analysis between these different theories, right? And what I thought was really interesting, and it, even if you may or may not have an answer to this question, it's just something to think about. Um, and you highlight that the geographical locales that you're looking at are the U.S., Canada, and England. And I was wondering if in doing that research, there is a different way in which middle class is defined just because of the different not only the different economical frameworks, but like I'm thinking of the ways in which a middle class family also, even just looking at Canada in Toronto, will look very different from a middle class family in Kitchener, right? And like I and also like I'm just really curious of where the data comes from because it would be easier to have these sort of communal community networks in larger settings, but yet the middle class status might be more precarious in a larger in a in a big metropolis space as opposed to maybe in a place where let's say housing is a little bit more affordable or there what I mean, but then the community aspect might be lesser because there are less middle class family in that particular area. So I don't know if that's something that's probably if you're just looking a lot of different theoretical work, but maybe considering that and thinking through those things because then if we want to quantify I guess your community cultural wealth framework, there'll be a different quantity of community to be able to have that framework in different geography space. So just something to think about, to consider, to maybe if you want to speak a little bit more on what that means in terms of geography when it comes in terms of wealth, um, whether it's economical or
I'm gonna give her a tip. I have a blank chicken. All right, that's a brilliant, very brilliant question. Because when you think about class, I've talked about socioeconomic. I have not mentioned so much, even about the symbolic, or in terms of those, and you're coming for me, right? You're coming for me. You're gonna be. We talk about that all too. But when you talk about middle class families, yeah, we have to consider geography because, like for example, if we use Canada, and we look at the GTA area, what is required to maintain a family in GTA area will be different from how it be maintained maybe in Saskatchewan or one of this maritime region. And starting as I said, starting that's Jamaica. That's Statistics Canada. Oh my God, my history's with me. Statistics Canada has already made a distinction in terms of what's required for a family to survive, where the poverty line is drawn. And even we use historical the historical forces in the United States, because when you look at like Patio's work, which is out of Chicago, even though you have middle class Black communities in Chicago, they are so close to the Black poor, you know, and that draws on your kind of analysis you're bringing to bear on this talk here. So I think I need to give it more deeper consideration here, but it's kind of hard. The class is such a nebulous and fluid concept, and it's like, what do I really want to talk about? And I think I'm gonna just be a bully. You know, I'm from Guyana. Someone later, and I'm going to just define what it looks like in terms of the socioeconomic. I want to follow maybe in the line of Patio and to some extent Rollock, but at the same time, I want to take into account those changing dynamics. And because Black middle class families, which I must state, its state is very precarious. For those persons, and James' work actually draws out this point beautifully, because you have some Black families who have just happened to be middle class. And those Black faces in high places, they're really catching hell, but you know, they're trying to put up a show. You know, they're out on the East End. I'm seeing some people here out in the East, you know, I'm pointing that direction, out in the East End. And so they cannot even afford to literally send the children to all these fancy activities in the school, because the reality is, sorry, my mic, the reality is many of those teachers in the suburban communities, white community, they're thinking that the children of those Black families, they're able to partake and they can indulge in all those that going to Montreal, and they can travel to US for some school trip. But those families are literally also on the edge, just trying to maintain the housing. And so the geography is playing a role in terms of, if you have the housing, if you have your own home ownership, and that is something you have to take into account. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And like I understand that with the what you're looking at, but if you ever look at this work like more specifically, you know, looking at the stats of what, you know, yeah, yeah, I think it'll be useful. Okay, so we have hands. So maybe we'll take a few questions, and then um like I'll ask like like a few questions, you jot them down and then you answer them. Yeah, yeah. So we'll do a few at a time. Yeah.
Great talk. I thought it was very, very interesting. One thing that I just want to ask is in terms of the gender component. Did you find that, I guess, daughters of Black middle class families carried a bigger burden or a bigger load to kind of be viewed as successful, or take that pressure onto the family? I don't know. Or did you find that there's a disparity between daughters and sons? How did anything like that come up? That's
Thank you.
Also wanted to echo that. Great talk. I'm so proud of you, Kelston. My question has to do with the whole aspect of sending kids back home. I am so familiar with that. And so I wanted to ask this. Okay, so I know I have a lot of family members whose children, are probably in the US and they're given problems, or they're having issues with them, they're not getting good grades, and then they send them to Jamaica to, discipline them and get them ready to re-assimilate into whatever society they're coming from. I'm wondering if through your research you've found what is that re-assimilation like? What does that look like in terms of, I know that it's like a protective mechanism for a lot of middle class families because their kids aren't getting good grades and they need them to be getting good grades, so they send them home. Is it impacted by who they're sent to? For example, if they're sent to a grandma, do they re-assimilate differently? If they're sent to a parent, a sibling, what does that look like if you find it in your research?
Is that okay? So, congratulations, really, really well done. Mine are more comments. The one comment I'm thinking of this idea of, like, I noticed you had Du Bois as one of your references earlier on, right? Yeah, and I was thinking about this idea of the double consciousness. Like, you're talking about how the gains that middle class families are achieving are really overshadowed by the racism in workplaces, in schools, in communities, the social isolation. And I was thinking, you know, if it would be interesting to look at middle class families in the global south, in Guyana, Jamaica, Africa, like to see how, because I mean, yes, there's still racism in those places as well, but it functions differently, right? So maybe how do they compare? So that's just one kind of comment, one thought. I don't know if you've given that any thought. And then the other thing, as you were speaking, makes me think of and I think probably a lot of people are aware of the Black boys who have gone missing, and how that whole movement is actually, when you speak of community, they're being found by community. Like, it's community. And Shayna McCalla, who has Instagram, like, her work is literally finding these kids. The police are not finding them because of the pathologizing of Black families. And these are, I had gone to one of the town halls, and these are just middle class Black families whose kids are going missing. But because of the institutional racism in policing says that, oh, well, clearly this is happening. And what's happening is they are actually being trafficked for drugs, but it's not that, oh, they're getting caught up in drugs because they're bad children. It's actually a human trafficking situation. They're being taken to Northern Ontario. But the way the police are dealing with it is like, well, you know, so it just plays out. I'm just saying, this is just an example of what you're talking about.
Three questions, yeah. And then after we'll come back. So we had gender, reintegration, and and Black boys. Oh, I
That tells you how hard they work for the money at York, you know? All right, so the first question is coming from Alana. Alana, that's a very great question. I was actually thinking about that question as I was going through the literature. And I look at Rollock's work, Rollock et al., 2015, and they were talking about making a distinction between the boys and the girl, middle class boys and girl experiences. It appears to me in in deducing that work is the boys are greater at risk. Not to say the women, Black women, the hypersexual tropes are not attached to those Black girls, but the harsher punishments and so on will actually push the boys outside of the school. So they're being sent home, they're on suspension. And when you look at Lacey's work in the United States, and she studies the middle class in Chicago, you recognize again a lot of the boys were falling prey to the gangs because of the proximity. Because of the history of racial segregation, these middle class families didn't get a chance to leave, or they don't have the resources as the upper middle to go to predominantly white. So they're still in proximity to the working class poor. And so some of their children were literally actually falling into gangs as much as they were smart. And so I would say the pressure is much more on the boys. Yeah. In terms of the read, that's a brilliant question, Shanique. In terms of how does it look, because I just look at the work out of England, and I think of Bolsey, who just see, you know what, they tend to do better, and these are African children, you know, not Caribbean. I think there's a distinction between Caribbean, how they're performing, and African. I think Caribbean are performing a little bit weaker. That's not so nice to say, but it's true. The Africans, the experience I've looked at in the Africans, when they come back in, they are reintegrating and even outperforming their peers, yeah? And these are families of Nigerian heritage. So they're going to boarding school and understand that system of education is as high as the Caribbean, but they say it's boarding school. Their families are middle class. They also have the example of having uncles around, you know, family members around who are accomplished. So they have been nurtured and cultivated in that spirit of excellence. When they come back, they just actually continue like, wow, my uncle is a judge. I never knew that. You know, they're seeing it now. They can talk to their cousins who are actually MBAs. Yeah. So when they get back, there was not so much text for me to see, you know, the differences in terms of how they're readjusting. You know, some people take the beautiful story for the research is some good. I think she just told me the good story I wanted to hear. I didn't bite. Not, I didn't bite at all. Now, in terms of the class formation in the Caribbean, because of how the class, middle class families are formed in the Caribbean, understand this is when the departure of the master from the region, especially in the 60s, in 1960s, when they gained independence. And it will be quite interesting. To be honest, Keisha, I have not thought of it because I was looking at it first. I said, huh, kind of middle class, Barbados middle class, Jamaican middle class. They have similar structure to the British middle class. But again, like I didn't know how to create that distinction to see in the Caribbean middle class, because I think sometimes the Caribbean middle class is such a so-called middle class. I don't know why am I saying that. You know, so-called middle class, because those middle class, when I was in England with my grandfather, it's like their middle class is so black middle class. They was different from the middle class I know in Guyana. I told those black middle class they have nasty tongues, you know. I don't know. I just saw some pattern behavior. I looked at my family in England as against some of my middle class family. I'm not, oh, be a working class. So my black middle class, I was like, I can't see no huge distinction between them and the working class. They still have nasty tongues. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly or saying it nicely, but they have nasty tongues. Like, okay, you know, I'm middle class cognition. I think that it's kind of different. They're not worried. They're so consumed with making money and consumed with the fact that, and they're never consumed with, like, okay, I think look at class and in the Caribbean, the comparison is about sometimes who's getting more. And when you look at a middle class cognition, it's about I need to know who's getting more than me. It's like I need to get more up. So they're not comparing down, they're always comparing up, you know? So they will always say things like, oh, I just drive a Tesla, but this person is driving a, you know? Yeah. They wouldn't go along and say about Lexus. So there are some distinctions and in terms of the symbolic and the behavioral that I always grapple with. And I think Savage work, if you're interested in class, I think Savage work 2015 has really cast some interesting nuances there around class in Britain. That's a latest study out of Britain. Yes.
Yeah, it's a very interesting presentations, very informative. So I'm interested to know that you know the Toronto last police chief was also from black, was a black man. There are a lot of black people who are also in influential positions, right? Very recently, the news in Google, you know, it was that a black boy from high school, from Kitchener, so he'd selected to Harvard for a water solution technology course. So black people, black kids, black children are also achieving. So my interest to know is that people who are in influential positions, like black people who are in influential positions, so what could be the cohesive framework to facilitate more for these intelligent black kids to assimilate in the society that they have been ignored? Yeah, it's not only about that black children or black families are, yeah, racism is also, I'm from India, I still feel racism, yeah. But the thing is that they are also intelligent and they are also, like, last police chief was from black, you know. So yeah, it's not a less achievement, right? So this is what I just think of, that how the powerful influential people can be you know, network to make a cohesive framework to facilitate more all these brilliant black families.
We got, yes.
Hi, I wanted to say thank you so much for your presentation, Kelston. I have to say a lot of what you spoke about was very relatable in terms of the experiences that I think about that I go through with my own son. So one of the things that I was curious about is that you talked a lot about this sort of cultural framework to protect against racism, but then also speaking about using it to maintain a class asset. And so I wanted to know, in your reading, what do you see as being most important to people? Is it about maintaining the class that they're at, or is it they're utilizing these frameworks more so in terms of protecting against racism that they're experiencing in these various capacities?
Okay, so these two questions, and then we'll get to the chat.
Wow. What's your name, let me ask?
Oh, so my question was that
The name, your names.
Minakshi.
All right. Oh my God. So you're actually making my head spin because you're trying to make me fall on a sword that says black faces in high places are gonna save us. They're not saving us. So I don't want us to walk away thinking that blackface in high place is gonna be no. They are troubled. I say they are troubled in the sense that if you look at in the academy, you might have, let's say, sociology, you might have, let's say, 2 black professors there. By the time they got up there, they could retire right away. They're burnt. They're just trying to survive and put up a show. I'm being honest. That's my observation. Yeah. So let's don't turn to black faces in high places to rescue us. I think what is actually very much visible here, very, very pronounced, is the community that we are from, the kind of community currency that many racialized people have, like from India, and people are finding protection, and they're finding growth, and they're finding the humanity in the community. And I'm thinking, as we talk about literally trying to improve or trying to allow the continuity of Black excellence, I hear that term, or Black students to literally perform well, is that we need to, how do we get these white women in Toronto, these horrible white teachers who are just lying on Black students to stop? You know, so they're the problems. They're the ones who are over policing children. Simple issue, they're blown to proportion. Oh my God, you know, Karen and Felicia's in the school. And you know, everything is like a whole drama. I was there, so I know they're so melodramatic. It's like, okay, what's the issue again? Okay, I got you. I see it. You know, so they need to be left alone. And how do we get these white teachers to leave these Black kids alone? And I think that's where I'm going to take it. Sorry, you know. And I hope I answered the question there, you know. We can even talk off mic. In terms of the second question, we're talking about is it what is the most valuable asset here? Is it for the protection of the class-based opportunities, or for maintaining it? Because when you look at class and how it's being produced and reproduced, it's about maintaining. Because as much as I might value community, I'm very class conscious too. Why would I I look at the story out of the work of Laurie 2011. As much as the Black family recognized the value of socializing the daughter in the Black community, and they were living a predominantly white community, they're also being mindful that they don't come home rapping, because they don't want to rap in the house, you know, or they come in, hey, yo, what's up, yo? You know, so as much as they are exposing them, they're also monitoring them that they don't come home with certain dispositions, because they know the cost of those dispositions if they should actually replicate it, or you know, in a wide space. Right away, the gaze is casting judgment, and the way it is like, okay, my child will not be given a lot of given careful consideration. So I'm thinking it could be both, but when it comes to Black people in particular, like other racialized group, we do value community. We value community. But when class is evoked, I think class interest is like, okay, we need to maintain this class interest, even maybe unconsciously doing it, because I can't allow somebody or some joker, I would say, to come with a yo, what's up, yo? You know, oh, that's a bar-like setting. Right now, it's not a yo, what's up, yo? You know, that's not here right now. We keeping up for the bar. You know, yeah. Some people might call me out online. I hope we never call me out online.
Okay, so we have some questions in the chat. Yeah, okay, yes, that's me. I think, okay, so the first one here by Donna How was the ascendancy of Black families impacted by their patriarchal heritage on migrating into a more liberal environment? Oh, that's a good question. I'll let you. I'll let you think.
Oh, so how was the tendency of Black family?
Comment a wonderful presentation. Yeah, form part of our social capital within both family and most times carry us through many challenges.
I think I will start with George. That's my brother from Kenya. Hi, sir. I would say, George, first, thanks for the question there. Yes, I have encountered that term Ubuntu. I am because you are. And so in the Black community, what I looked at, what I have found also too, indeed, as much as there's social distinctions between the working class and the Black middle class, at some time there's actually a conflation, especially like in England, the supplementary school programs. Both groups were attending because both of those groups were actually experiencing racial discrimination. They were experiencing teachers' negative comments and so on in school. And so the formation of that supplementary education program in England, it was designed to really support youth across social lines. And they were there and benefiting together and tremendously from that. So thanks for that question. And Donna, you want to embarrass me in the public. Embarrass me. How was the ascendancy of Black families impacted by their patriarchal heritage on migrating into a more liberal environment? No, I want to draw on a work I'm grappling with right now, dear Donna, to answer that question. And so when you look at the patriarchal position of Black middle class family, which I didn't pay much attention to, but what I can say, you do have the Black family, where I see the Black upper class family. I'm drawing from the work of Lacey here, where they are very much those families are very much interested to ensure that their children are not necessarily working, but they are more studying. Because you do have the Black lower middle class, their children do work and study too. Unlike the Black upper class, they are given that kind of haven to literally focus on their studies, and then they're also being conditioned at the same time to recognize that if you want to maintain this life, like one father said to his son, it means you will have to work hard. So they are actually being groomed and conditioned to actually carry on that type of class-based advantage. But the patriarchal, that was just one of the stories I can bring to bear there, Donna. But great question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And if I might add one thing more, Donna, sorry, one thing more. And in terms of the identity with the class there, and this is a beautiful piece of study I'm reading right now. There are Blacks who have different type of social identities in terms of the class structure. There are some who have dual identities, those who are working class and moved up to the middle class. They will have a dual identity. They can cross both lines. And then you have some Black middle class families who are just strong Black middle class. They just promote Blackness. And they have some who are not identifying with any identity per se in terms of Black or white. They're just a kind of general loose group. But for those who actually those families who actually maintain, to me, a much more let me say neutral ground, you'll find that they would be removed from the working class over generations. So they don't have no Black hardship to speak of. These are the people who might be 15 and 19 generation middle class. Okay, they will have a different relationship with the Black community. These people have their own clubs, and they are just like the white supremacists. These are Black supremacists of color. Okay, thanks, Donna.
Thank you. I might be an exception in that I have a master's degree, but I hold on to my working class roots.
Amazing.
I'm out west in Edmonton.
Amazing, amazing.
Yes. So I'm historian laureate for the city of Edmonton. So I'm busy producing historical data for my communities. Pleasure to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you, Donna. We'll have to talk offline. Shoot me an email, yeah? We'll connect.
Okay, thank you very much.
To mind Black people's business, yeah? Okay.
So we have one or two more questions in the room. Because there's no hands in the chat, so I have one over here.
Thanks so much. Actually, that your answer to the last question is a great segue to my question, because I was going to ask whether your research looks as well at the differences between generational immigrants. So, when you mentioned the return to home, for example, is that understanding different for a first generation immigrant versus a 15th generation immigrant, as you mentioned? That's one part of the question. And then the same thing on the other side is, when there's that return to home, and I forget, somebody here asked, what is that like for the kid? Yes, thank you. And especially if you're, let's say, a 5th or 15th generation kid, what is that like, especially coming from a diaspora in a country that has a very different understanding, perhaps, of what homeness is? Then you're returning to the actual thing, which may be very different than what you understood your own home to be. So just wondering if you explore that too.
Ruth, I know you had a second burning question.
It's funny because I think that in your discussion, you've kind of answered part of it. And I was wondering too about the framework that you included spirituality. And now I'm trying to think, I can't remember if you talked about even thinking about diasporic communities. Is there anything within that in terms of thinking through your connection to history as part of that, which I think you may have, and then the other question was, within thinking through these networks, we're talking about Black middle class, but are there, what would I say, like pluritic families within the structure? So if there's Black middle class, working class, all of that within the structure, did you find any of that within your work to speak to how that impacted or played into their framework?
I didn't follow that.
Yeah.
Just give me.
So just thinking about when we're talking about middle class families within the network, is there sometimes families that represent more than one class? How does that play into what you have been speaking about, or if you found in the research? Just thinking.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Oh, you're going to be the last one.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I just have a quick question. In terms of data analysis, did you have any problem? I'm sorry. Feedback? Yes. Did you ever have any problems maybe getting data from Statistics Canada or just getting data in general? Like things like where you feel as though either it wasn't collected properly or they just had barriers to it, or even a question you had, like, say, for instance, I don't know, about a certain population, you didn't find it because they just didn't bother to collect data on? Yeah.
Okay, so I have questions about multi-generational data, lots of stuff.
Okay, I'll start with the gentleman there. Sorry, Dr. Rodney. So it's the study of itself, yeah, it's literally a theorization. So I didn't actually go out and collect data, okay? But I looked at data in terms of Canada, was literally nothing to find to make sense of the Canadian Black middle class family. I was struggling to find that most of the data I got out of the United States, because they collect race-based data and it's always published with peer research, which is a reputable organization. That organization was actually I could have actually gotten information from, but in Canada, I only draw on Carl's James' work. We talk about a middle class family that he conducted in 2000, research he did in 2021. Yeah. In terms of the right gentle lady's question, I did not look at it across generations. I didn't take into account in terms of how the generational impact can actually, animate different experiences of the children, which is quite interesting. But I did read a study, which I didn't use in this for this paper. We find, especially that these are first generation Afro students from the Afro families from the continent. They do struggle relationally, because they are actually, their parents want them to adopt the traditional way of life, and now they're trying to fit in the Canadian way of life, and they're in the dual role. You should mention that they're playing this dual role, but the parents do see it as a way of they're actually straying away from the well-established culture milieu. So that in itself created a lot of tension in the family there. But I didn't explore the intergenerational, the generational genealogy and its impact. Okay. In terms of Dr. Rodney's question, when it comes to what did I say? You talk about that's old age. I think I'm tired now. With the spirituality, the spirituality for sure. Oh, let me go with within. So within the Black middle class family, what you find, because the Black middle class family is it's a very tenuous, a weak structure. You always find that Blacks are slipping in and out of poverty, because you'll find that a lot of Black families, their wealth is tied up in the housing market. So you can imagine the housing crisis that they've had 97, 98, 2011, they had one too, a couple of years going back. So anytime we have these financial crises, especially in housing, it will go. Black people don't have a lot of money on the stock and in bonds and so on. Most of their money is tied, the middle class money is tied in the housing market. And then you have this very precarious class within the Black middle class, where they are just living paycheck to paycheck. So any loss of job, they can go right back into poverty. Or if you move, like even Blacks like from me, who've moved from Guyana as a middle class standing, and I became a working class in Canada, so you'll have that also in terms of you can fall back. Because who wants my degree from Guyana? They said, that's a university? We don't know that. When I came here, they said, no, where's that? I said, in Guyana, you guys have one there too? I said, no, we have pig pens and fall pens only. So you'll find a lot of people who are actually transitioning to Canada. They can fall into the working class setting very easily because of that international qualification there. And in terms of spirituality, what was the question? Spirituality again?
Oh no, I was more asking, when you're looking at the different capitals, local capitals, was there one specifically for like a historical capital, particularly for diasporic communities that may not necessarily be able to trace back?
And even the diaspora community and the local community, they do draw on those historical figures, like especially in Black middle class families, the ones who maintain not a dualist identity but a sort of strong Black identity, they will be pro-Black. So they will not go to those museums in England, or Mother Tussauds, those kind of stuff. They're going to Black spaces. They have Black figures in the home. These are the Black conscious people who are grounded in their Blackness. Unlike the ones who traffic back and forth, they're likely to go to those spaces. Yeah. And mind you, some of those middle class families, their parents are still working class. So they go back and forth too. That's why I said the boundary lines are literally very, very smooth. I think the right honored gentleman has a question. Can we give him the last word?
I was just building off of Dr. Rodney's question about like those communities of Black Canadians, like my family, who don't have connection to their ancestral roots, and how did they navigate these spaces, and how did they come into contact with this aspect of sending home, and where does that focus rely? How does also building off of this, how does that symbolic violence of which they experience kind of interject with this kind of experience of what you're saying of this loss or gaining of cultural capital?
I'm going to leave that question so I can marinate with it as I walk through this. So, thank you for that question, sir.
Yes, keep it going. That was a wonderful presentation. definitely enriching and leaving us, all of us, with many things to think about on our walk back home or drive or however you got here. So this is the penultimate Tubman talk, because we have one last one that's coming at you on April 10th with Kennedy. And we don't have all the information right now, but it is forthcoming. I also wanted to let you know that the Harriet Tubman Institute's Journal of African Diaspora, oh my God, please tell me I know how to say the JAADS of African and African Diaspora Studies is taking on submissions right now. So if there's a piece that you want to publish and you're really eager to have it published, we are really excited to have it in our journal. We have great editors that are taking the time to really help you fine tune your published work. And we also have our really anticipated conference for next year, well, next academic year, so in October 2025 to Jamaica. Please check out our website for more details, but we have many, many things going on here at Tubman. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.